All right, I'm going to mute you all and I'm going to play some music while we wait for everybody else to show up.
Fabulous.
Okay.
So that was music for two hands, four hands by Jules Massenet, written in 1870, so at the very beginning of his career. So, first of all, I hope you're all well. Those of you in fire stricken areas, my heart goes to you, and I pray that it rains soon. And to all of us, I hope that we're all managing. So, okay, Werther, Massenet. Truth is, I'm not a fan of Massenet. I read a whole bunch about him in the last week, and there are a whole bunch of critics who agree with me. However, for all the bland reviews, there are also passionate fans, among which is Sir Antonio Pappano, the conductor of the Royal Opera House in London. And if you're interested, watch his talk about this opera. I'll put a link at the bottom, or I'll tell you somehow. Um, he sits at the piano and he talks and he plays, and while he's playing, he sings along, and he's really fantastic. Still, though, what I realized is that this sort of music, melodramatic and extreme angst with despair, is just not my style. I'm more of an Italian. The Italians yell and scream, and there's a lot of passion, but it's all over quickly. The thing about this opera is that the intensity ramps up bit by bit in every act, and there's very little relief. But, and, just to say, I don't want to be too hard on Massenet. In 1894, he writes the opera Thais, which includes a piece for violin in it, which I'm going to play for you on the viola, just part of it. that's pretty beautiful music, you know? So, make sure that you tune in to watch the Met Opera free stream on Sunday night, September 13th, this Sunday. It is available starting at 7:30 p.m. and you can access it until 6:30 the next day. So, let's just get started. Massenet is born in 1842 and he dies in 1912. So he really straddles the end of the 19th century. He's the youngest of 4 children. His father was a prosperous ironmonger, and his second wife, who was an amateur musician, is Massenet's mother. She gives Massenet his first piano lessons. When he's 6, they move to Paris. At 9, Massenet auditions for the Paris Conservatoire and is immediately admitted at 9, which is really, he's very young. He becomes the student of the composer Ambroise Thomas, who supports his career for the rest of his life. Over, by most accounts, in those early years, he's a mediocre student. He's uninspired, he's lackluster. Okay, he was accepted at 9, but still, he's not a prodigy. In 1855, his father gets really sick and the family moves away from Paris. And I think Massenet gets some fire in his belly. He thinks, wow, I'm going to be on my own. I've got to support myself. 4 years later, he wins the top piano prize in the conservatoire and things he's starting to get some work. Most of the piano students in those days made money by playing the organ. It was steady income, but Massenet has no affinity with the organ. So he ends up supporting himself by giving piano lessons and by playing percussion in local orchestras. And playing percussion gives him the experience in the pit. He learns a lot about orchestration and he learns how an orchestra functions in a pit. He also gets work as a piano accompanist, in the course of which time he meets Wagner and Berlioz, who are his heroes. I'm going to show you a picture of Massenet. Let's see. So here's a picture of young Massenet. Maybe a little brooding, but he's a nice enough guy. So, in 1863, he wins the Prix de Rome, which gives him 3 years to study composition in Rome. This is an amazing opportunity. Also, it's testimony to me that he started working harder and he earned this prize. While he's in Rome, he meets Franz Liszt, who asks Massenet to take over giving lessons to the daughter of one of his rich patrons. This is Louise Constance de Gracie, otherwise known as Ninon, and they develop a relationship. But since Massenet is still a student and he has no money, he has no hope of marrying her just at that moment. So he returns to Paris, he returns to composing, and he teaches 6 hours a day. And in 1866, he marries Ninon, who was born a year before he was, 1841. She lives until 1938, which to me is amazing that there were people, I guess I'm the same, who straddled 2 centuries. They have one daughter, Juliette, who was born in 1868. Also in 1868, Massenet meets Georges Hartmann, who becomes his publisher and his mentor for the next 25 years. This is relevant because Hartmann is listed as one of the librettists for the opera Werther, and we'll get back to that. In 1870, so the year that this piece that I played at the beginning was composed, is the Franco-Prussian War. France loses. Massenet fights alongside his friend Georges Bizet. And he comes home, and his early attempts at commercializing his compositions are not successful. So he earns money by teaching at the Paris Conservatoire, where he started. His own teacher, Ambroise Thomas, appoints him as professor at the Conservatoire, and by all accounts, he's very devoted to his students, and he's a popular and respected teacher. Among his students are Charpentier and Ernst Chausson. You can look that up, not relevant. Still, even though he's doing a lot of teaching, he composes regularly. He rises at 4 a.m. and he works until noon. And this is a habit that he will maintain for the rest of his life. And we're going to look at a picture of middle-aged. This is middle-aged Massenet. In 1877, he has his first real success with the opera Le Roi de Lahore, which takes its story from the Mahabharata. The Times Review of London at the time gave him this review. Monsieur Massenet's opera, although not a work of genius proper, is of more than common merit, and contains all the elements of at least temporary success. I include this review because over time it seems really clear that everyone agrees that Massenet is not in the top tier of composers. But I'd like to point out something. He may not be in the top 1%, but he's absolutely in the top 10%. I've come to believe that writing a piece of art, literature, opera, painting that endures has to give you a lot of credit. And more than one of Massenet's operas has endured. Anyway, he also seems not to have had good relations with his colleagues at the Conservatoire. Both Camille Saint-Saëns and Claude Debussy really, really don't like him. And let's take a look at where he fits in the timeline of French composers. So Hector Berlioz is born in 1803 and he lives till 1869. He's like the father of French 19th century opera. He writes Les Troyens, he writes, there are other operas he writes. I am also generally not a fan of Berlioz. Sorry. And here, this is really this is where he fits in. He is really at the end of the 19th century, and he leads the way for Claude Debussy and Erik Satie and Poulenc. He has, even though they don't like him, his composing and his sensibility about orchestration and melody really affect how those guys go on to compose later. So let's get to the opera. But in order to let's back up for a second and talk about Goethe. So the novel that this opera is based on was called The Sorrows of Young Werther. And it's written by Johann Goethe in 1774. And I love this word, it's an epistolary novel, which means it's written completely in letters. And when a writer does this, when an author does this, when they write a novel, it allows them to have a lot of narration that you couldn't otherwise do in a believable way, because we don't want to read an article, a book that's all exposition. We want to see things happen. And in a book that's really laid out in letters, you can tell how you feel in a way that you can't in a novel. And Goethe writes this novel because he himself, so Goethe writes this when he's 24, and he writes it in under 6 weeks. And he writes it because he himself is in the situation of the protagonist of his book. And let me just say that the basic story of Werther is a young man who is in love with a married woman, and the only way out that he sees is that one of them has to die. And since he himself can't commit murder, he decides that the best solution to this is for him to kill himself. And I guess this is a trigger warning. I'm going to talk a little bit about suicide coming up. So Goethe is 24 and he's hopelessly in love with this woman. He writes the novel and he publishes it anonymously. And it creates such a sensation that there are young men who have who do copycat suicides. They are found shot through the head with the novel next to them. So this Werther fever prompts many locales, including the entire countries of Denmark and Italy, to ban the book outright. In addition, the clothing that that Goethe dresses Werther in becomes a fashion, and it is banned in the city of Leipzig a year later in 1775. It's yellow pants with a blue waistcoat and riding boots. And what's interesting to me is that it reminded me of something, and I figured it out, which was in the early 2000s, a long black trench coat, which came from the movie The Matrix, was banned in many schools because that's what the guys who, the tragedy of Columbine, that's what they were wearing. So many schools banned wearing a long black trench coat. Because when I first read that just even the clothes were banned, I thought, oh, that's a little extreme. But it happens. As an interesting aside, Johannes Brahms, who is a contemporary of Massenet, he found himself in just such a love triangle. Brahms was in love with the wife of Robert Schumann, hopelessly in love with her. And in 1875, he completes a piano quartet, so piano, violin, viola, cello, opus 60 in C minor. Very, very, very emotional piece. And throughout that piece, there are musical references to Clara. So the musical translation of those letters is C, B, A, G sharp, A. And he writes a letter to his publisher, Simrock, suggesting that an illustration be added on the cover of the music, namely of a head with a pistol pointing to it, and that he could actually dress the young man in a blue frock coat, yellow trousers, quote, this is a quote, and riding boots, and says, quote, now you can form an idea of this music. It's astounding to me that 100 years after the novel came out, that even the clothes the character wore were still so iconic as to refer to it as well. I have a picture of the clothes. So there you see it. So it's a waistcoat, which is, a coat that stops here but has tails, yellow pants, and riding boots. And this was like, there were young men who wore this as a token of their tortured love for someone. So Massenet had been considering writing an opera based on the Bohème story, but after he reads Werther, the novel, he declares, quote, such rapturous and ecstatic passion brought tears to my eyes. What moving scenes and thrilling moments it would bring about. Werther it is. So apparently the novel had been given to him by his publicist, George Hartmann. Credit for the libretto is given not only to George Hartmann, but Edouard Blau and Paul Millier. And there is a story that claims, in fact, that Hartmann was only added as lip service as librettist because he was recently bankrupt, and Massenet was trying to help him financially. I don't know. Anyway, Massenet finishes the opera in 1887, and the Opéra Comique, which is where you had all the operas premiered in those days in Paris. The director of the Opéra Comique rejects it. He says it's too gloomy and they can't put it on. So Massenet puts it aside, and he works on other things for 5 years. In 1892, the Imperial Vienna Opera, having had a huge success with Massenet's opera Manon, asks him if he has something else to please their audiences. Massenet is happy to send them Werther, and it has its world premiere in Vienna with a German translation, and it is received with great acclaim. The next season, in January of 1893, it gets its Paris premiere, and it's just not a big success. So he somehow couldn't get traction. So let's just talk about the synopsis, and I'm going to mix in music at the same time. I'm going to play some excerpts, and I'm going to try and set up my computer while I'm talking. Okay. Massenet uses certain themes to portray the characters and the moods. Werther, a tenor, has the bulk of the juicy parts in this opera, and often gets introduced by a lot of low, brooding cello music. Charlotte, the leading lady, and a mezzo-soprano, gets some pleasant and homey country music. And she has also described her indecision about what to do, because in Massenet's version of this story, the woman is not married. So Charlotte has promised her dying mother to marry Albert, this boring but stable person. So her indecision gets some huge dissonant chords, which we hear at the beginning of Act 1 and at the beginning of Act 3. The music is through composed. By that I mean it is composed to be continuous. So it's not like an opera where you get a big aria and then someone stands and waits for the applause. There are two spots where there is applause, and they're in the third act, which is the really passionate thing. But in the overall, the opera just keeps going. Massenet uses many of the same themes repeatedly, and he has the singer sing on top of the orchestra when the orchestra is playing the melody that repeats. So it's not always repeated verbatim. He alters it, but it is you do hear the music of his tortured feelings a lot. So this is the beginning of the prelude of the opera. So I'm just going to say, you hear these big chords and they're dissonant and they are off kilter a little bit. You hear this all the time. And the pitch keeps going down because it's so heavy. Okay? So you hear the cellos, you hear the weightiness of it. To me, this is an amazingly heavy way to start an opera. This recording, by the way, is the Cologne Radio Symphony Orchestra under the direction of Ricardo Chailly, and you will later on hear Placido Domingo singing, Elena Obratstova, and Arlene Auger. So you hear the sinking pitch, you heard the... So right after that, we're introduced to some sort of country music. And at the beginning of the opera, Werther comes in and he loves nature. He loves the trees and the brook and the little corner of the building. And this is the music that we hear for that. On like that, and it's pleasant music, and it's his love of nature and all that. So the opera opens. That's all in the overture. The opera opens, and actually, well, I'll tell you about it later. As the opera opens, it's in July, and Charlotta's, so Charlotta is one of 8 children. She is maybe 20. Werther is 23 and Albert is like 25. So as the opera opens, her father, who is recently widowed, is rehearsing the younger 6 children to do Christmas carols. And the kids aren't really, as kids will, they're not really behaving. So you hear them singing, Noel, 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 like that. And so he really has to rehearse them. And Sophie, the second oldest daughter, who is maybe 15, she comes in and she brings cake for the kids. And at that moment, Werther enters. And at this moment, the drama ratchets up to maybe a level 2 or a 3. So here's the music that is used to introduce Werther. Notice the cello solo, there's a violin solo, and just notice the level of anxiety. So, in his words, the name of this aria is Alors, c'est bien ici, which means, this is nice here. But that music sounded a little tense for that. Anyway, Werther has come to take Charlotte to the ball. And at this moment, she comes out in her beautiful dress and she's just lovely. And Massenet gives her this music. Oops. He gives her this music. And it's very nice. It's very, a little pedantic, but very nice. And Werther is smitten by her as soon as he sees her. And I'm going to play you again the recording because, well, you'll see why. So he sees her and he says, "Oh, spectacle idéal d'amour," like like the most ideal spectacle of love. So. So that goes on like that, and it's thick and it's very emotional, very melodramatic. In this production, and I'll talk about it later, but there's a wonderful use of video projections. So there's the possibility of changing scenes without changing the set. So, and I say it because Werther shows up and they go to the ball and suddenly they're in the ball without a set change, which just, it's really cool. And they get to the ball and the music for the ball is like country dance music. So in the background you hear bump, 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 like that. And the dance music goes like this. And we hear that that's like indication of the dance music, and they have a great time. There's dancing, and while they're at the ball, Albert, who is Charlotte's fiance, who's been away for I think 6 months, he turns up at the house, and Sophie tells him that she's not there, and he's disappointed. And I want you to hear the music that Massenet gives to Albert. So this is Albert's music. That's the first iteration. And in 2 minutes or something, he adds some counterpoint. So he goes. So it's, you know, it's not the music that he gives Werther. Definitely not. You know, I mean, this. Right? That music? No. So, anyway, Albert goes away and he says he'll surprise Charlotte the next day. Charlotte and Werther walk home through the trees together. Again, no set change, just projections. And it's amazing because it really looks like they're in the trees. And there is this music, and it's the Clair de Lune. And this is as they come back from the ball. And this is very sentimental and simple and, yeah. So that starts with just a solo cello, and it ends up with the entire orchestra playing that. So again, we hear that a bunch of times, but and Werther and Charlotte are it's late at night. They're talking outside her house. And Werther is saying, oh, he loves everything about her, how he loves how domestic she is with the children and how beautiful she is and his ecstasy at seeing her and how he wants to possess her. And Charlotte responds by talking about her dead mother, talking about how the children feel real loss. And they're really talking at cross purposes, but it really doesn't seem to hinder the plot development. They just, and at this moment, Charlotte's father inside the house yells to her. He goes, Charlotte, Charlotte, Albert is back. Suddenly the whole mood on stage changes. Charlotte tells Werther, for a moment near to you, I forgot my promise to my mother. Werther, whose entire aspect changed, says, well, keep your promise. I'll just die. And she goes inside and he sings, it's called A Dream. And you know how the pitch was going down and down before? He sings this dream and it's like, he says, it's a dream, but it's such ecstasy, it's such happiness. And here, listen to it. Music, bum 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 bum, and like he has taken that theme of them walking home together and made it this. It's like a Mack truck, and at the end of the act, Werther is on stage and he says, "Un autre, son époux." someone else is her husband, and that's how Act 1 ends. So, Act 2, it's October, so we're 3 months later. August, yeah, 3 months later. And Albert and Charlotte have been married for 3 months. Very, very chastely together, they sit on a bench, and clearly there is no chemistry. So Albert's music has now morphed from the first act. So the first act it was da da dum ba da dum ba da dum like that, and now I'm gonna play it. I'm gonna play what he says because he says toi moi, and he goes into triplets, and it's still Albert's music. He says 3 months, I'm so happy we're married. And in front of them, the town is preparing for a celebration. And they have this meaningless conversation while they're sitting on the bench. I think they're like 3 feet apart. And Charlotte goes to help to get ready for the dinner that's being held in the village later. And just at this moment, Werther has been watching them, and he comes in. And he, I think maybe, don't know when this happened, but okay. He says, again, un autre, son époux, and this is his music. I mean, to me, the quality of the difference of the music between Albert and Werther is fantastic. It's like Albert really sounds boring, and Werther is really like the bad boy and the exciting thing. So Werther comes in and he has a conversation with Albert because they've all become friends now. And Albert says, yeah, I know that maybe before you had a thing for her when she was free, but now that's over, right? He's clearly warning Werther. Werther says, oh, don't worry. There was a storm, but it blew over long ago. And Albert leaves, and oh no, he doesn't leave because Sophie comes in. But Albert goes to the side. Werther goes to the side, and he's like thinking, it's not over. And just at that moment, Sophie walks in, and Sophie is lovely. She's young and bubbly, and she's comic relief in this opera. And we hear her youth. Sorry, I didn't mean to play that. That's her. We hear her youth, we hear her, and it's just a little bit of a pressure cooker relief here. And at that moment, she sees Werther, and her aspect changes. She's like, oh, come on, cheer up. So anyway, this goes on, and by the end of Act 2, Werther's despair level is at a 4 or 6 on the frustration meter, and he ends up bumping into Charlotte, and he hassles her so badly that she tells him to just go away. But she doesn't say go away forever. She says go away and come back Christmas Eve. Okay, so now we're in Act 3. Act 3 opens on Christmas Eve. And for some reason, on Christmas Eve, Charlotte is alone. She's in the living room, and she's reading all the letters that Werther had written her while he was exiled. Long, sad, manipulative letters. And this is what we hear. This is how Act 3 opens. You get the idea. It's kind of sad and depressing. And what's interesting is until this moment, we really haven't seen who Charlotte is. We have no sense of her character or her emotional state. And at this moment, she sings an aria. It's called the letter aria, and I'm not going to play it for you because you have to listen to this in the opera. But suddenly we see a big outpouring of emotion from this girl who before now has been pretty bland. And it's an incredible transformation. So she's sad while she's singing, reading these letters. And Sophie comes and tries to cheer her up and is unsuccessful. Charlotte is not to be cheered. She says to Sophie, just go, let my tears just fall. And this is a very famous aria that comes after the letter aria. It's called Va laisser couler mes larmes. Go, let my tears fall. And listen carefully in this aria because Massenet uses a saxophone. And the saxophone is just not a Western opera instrument. It's just not. And it wasn't even invented until 1846. But he uses it because it has this sad, mournful quality to it that really underscores how sad Charlotte is. And what do you know? Just as she's having a little pity party, Werther shows up. He looks like crap. He's like pale and his eyes are all sunken. And he comes in and he looks around the room and he says, oh, look, there's the piano where we made music. And oh, look, there are the books we used to read with our heads so close together. And oh, look, there are the guns. Charlotte diverts his attention and asks him to read her some poetry. He reads the poet Ossian, and here we hear another beautiful aria that you just have to. Pourquoi me réveiller? Why wake me? The spring, and it's incredibly beautiful, and it's just, you have to watch it. So one thing leads to another, and suddenly they're rolling on the floor. Suddenly she comes to her senses and she tells him, I can never see you again, never ever, and she runs from the room, and Werther leaves. Albert comes back home to a dark house and he knows that Werther has been there. And what Massenet does with Albert's music at this point is he makes it this. So the beginning, remember it was, and then it was, right? Now it's, so it's a totally different thing. And it's because Albert knows. He knows. And a letter is delivered to Albert from Werther asking to borrow his pistols as he is planning on going on a long trip. Albert knows exactly what he's doing when he tells Charlotte to give the pistols to the messenger to deliver to Werther. And that is the end of Act 3. Act 4 begins with Charlotte getting dressed, getting her coat, getting ready, and running to Werther. And we hear the music, the overture music in Act 3, and this is still Christmas Eve. And naturally, because it's opera, she's going to get there too late. It's going to take her a while to get there. But here's the beginning of Act 4. And yeah. So I imagine her on a horse going, and it takes her a while to get there, but just listen to the limmer. He uses all of these low instruments, and there's this tremolo in the strings, and it's all really tense. Okay, so you get the idea. She gets there after he's pulled the trigger. And be warned, in this production, it's very, very realistic. There is CSI quality blood spatter in this production. Charlotte cradles Werther for at least 20 minutes while he still sings beautifully and he's dying. He dies content as she tells him she loves him. And in a bookend to the story, we hear the children singing that Noel song from the beginning of the opera in the distance as she holds him while he dies. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about this production. So this production is by Sir Richard Eyre, and its use of video projections is fascinatingly literal for opera. It's I don't know how they do this. It's really incredible. It's not like a movie projector over them. I don't know. So he sets the opera in Massenet's own time in the late 19th century, and he fills in the gaps of the story by using high-tech and very realistic special effects. The tragic, foreboding music in the overture is used to show a flashback to the death and the funeral of Charlotte's mother, which is artistic license, as this doesn't actually appear in the original stage directions. Throughout the opera, Eyre's visual concepts brings the action as close to the audience as possible through a series of skewed framing devices, which are incredibly innovative and metaphorical because they illustrate Werther's emotional stability, which is also going off kilter. And the projections have the ability to change the mood. So in the first act, the children are eating cake, and then she's on her way to the ball, like I said, and there's no set change. There's just some candles. And suddenly we are in a ballroom. And just as suddenly they're walking home into the trees. The projections also have they change the mood by changing the overall color palette of the stage in a way that's different than lighting. So we start out in July and it's sunny and it's all yellow, and then we get to autumn 3 months later in October and it's all more orange and dark, and then it's winter at the end and it's all somber and dark, and the color projection is just like the trajectory of the emotions in the opera. Also, an unusual thing about this for late 19th century opera is that there are no ensembles, no tableaus, no trios, no quartets. It's always just one or two people at a time singing on stage. Finally, this cast is stellar. Jonas Kaufmann, in the leading role, has everything a tortured romantic tenor hero should. He's got a beautiful tenor voice. It's got gravitas and lightness. So he has the ability to have like the depth of a baritone but still be a tenor. He's got good looks and he's an amazing actor. Sophie Koch, she's making her Met debut as Charlotte in this production. She's wonderful. Her voice flows out of her like velvet, and she's primly believable in her determination to keep her promise to marry the boring Albert. This production is from March of 2014. Lisette Oropeza, as Charlotte's younger sister, is sweet, fresh, and she provides really needed comic relief. One more thing. Make sure you stay tuned in for the interviews at the end. You'll get to see Jonas Kaufmann smiling and laughing, which is such a relief because we've seen him in despair all night. As you watch the opera, you'll notice that I've left out some characters in telling the synopsis. There are two drinking friends who are Charlotte's father's friends. There's a young couple at the ball who are bickering, and the party in the village is for the pastor who's been married for 50 years. And maybe this is a foil, like the stable marriage or the bickering relationship. But it doesn't seem that these two these characters drive the action, so I left them out. That's all I got. Any questions? No questions? Well, thank you for coming.
Brava.
I'm gonna put a thank you. Murray, unmute yourself. I'm gonna put a link. There'll be a video link to this on my YouTube page. So if anybody else wants to see it, and definitely watch the opera on Sunday night. And I have no idea when the next one of these that is that I'm gonna do, because the Met hasn't put up a schedule of what they're doing next. Werther is the last opera on their schedule, so I have no idea. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Can I say something? I ran into your sister
Oh,
in Geneva, New York, a couple of days ago, and she told me about it, and I just couldn't get in on time. Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Thank you for coming. I definitely tune into the opera on Sunday night. And you know, the Met is streaming operas every night. So if you love the opera, and even if you don't love the opera, check out some of them, because classical music with theater is a pretty amazing vehicle. And you know, there are people who say it's a dead art form, but I'm like, yeah, Rembrandt is dead and we still flock to him. So
Van Gogh. Van Gogh.
oh. Well, everybody keep safe. Be well.
Thank you.
You
Thank
too.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.